All right, so Joe, what I was asking, and I'm going to preface it with some stuff, but what I was asking was, do you think with the current state of unrest in our country that the plight of Jewish people as a marginalized group goes, un goes overlooked or not addressed, or do you or and even another part to that is, do you think it's always been overlooked, and not just because of the current unrest, but you know just even before that, you know what I mean, before Black Lives Matter and everything that's going on. And I was prefacing it with, I was speaking about identity politics and how I think in some cases identity politics can be divisive, especially on the left. Like I think the mission statement for the left should be, equality, right? And I think that could cause us to just equality across the boards, right? Wherever we see issues of inequality, for instance, no matter who the marginalized group is that's suffering as a result, we all come together, and attack that issue collectively. And the reason why I'm saying this is because, when I look at history and, I understand, it is my understanding that your understanding of the nuances of history is just deeper than mine. You know what I mean? I definitely understand history, but I know you get into the nuances of especially, 20th century, and I mean, there's from what I've seen, there's just no real, area of strength. You just pretty much have the entire 20th century as your strong point historically. You understand what I'm saying?
Thank you. Yes, and I admit I do have some blind spots, but I think basically American and your European history are my strong suit. I would like to learn more about other aspects of world history, but thank you. Definitely, yeah, modern Western history, I guess, more or less.
Well, what I've noticed from just my understanding of 20th century history is that identity politics can be detrimental to detrimental to marginalized groups as much as it can be beneficial, in the sense that, like, you have examples where, like, for instance, during women's suffrage, right? So, the women's suffrage movement, like,
Yeah.
you couldn't, lesbians, for instance, couldn't, as a byproduct of us living in a predominantly, white male patriarchal society, right?
Right.
There are only going to be so many concessions, right? So if women are fighting for rights, could these women also ally themselves with the LGBT community and embrace those, that plight under the same umbrella? And in many cases, you find many examples where they just couldn't, because coming up in a white male patriarchy, it's like, well, they're not going to accept everything at once. But the reality is, if we stay a collective, right? You see it again in the 60s, right? You had, a clear division, is history kind of the winners write history, right? And a lot of people like to look good, but the reality is, many people didn't like Martin Luther King up until the day he died. Like, that's just what it is, right? And including Black people. Like, they just, so you see it again with, the Nation of Islam, with most northern Black people who thought Martin Luther King was crazy. You understand? Not most, but a large section of northern Black people living in the North just, he was just a news story, right?
Right.
And your Nation of Islam obviously didn't support him. And so you find these examples in history where identity politics can work negatively. And again, it's because, from my perspective, it's because, well, you have one group who, puts their plight over the next group's plight. Not that they disagree with the next group's plight, but their plight is just, the most important thing to them. Well, again, and I just wanted to say, and I'm going to wrap it up, I think that, at least from my understanding and for what I've learned from, the progress that was made and the mistakes that was made by the generations that have come before, we can, as a collective, come together on these individual issues. It's kind of like, for lack of a better term, the mob. Like, we can mob up and, go from point A to point B to point C in just like a broad stroke. Like, okay, here we're hitting this, we're done with this, now we're hitting this, we're hitting this, we're hitting this, we're hitting this, and we can, deal with issues that face individual groups or marginalized groups as a collective. Anyway, I just wanted to preface my questions with those thoughts, and I want to turn it over to you.
Yeah, I appreciate that a lot, and thank you. Because thank you for I appreciate that you noticed my interest in history, because it is definitely something I'm passionate about, something I've studied for years. And to answer sort of what you were saying, I largely agree. I mean, I think I would distinguish, of course, between this kind of shallow form of liberal identity politics, as I'm sure you would. I would distinguish between that and like actual genuine struggles for justice and for equality.
Right.
And one thing I will say is that I think it's your initial question about if I think anti-Semitism is falling by the wayside or if it's not being addressed. It's not so much that I think it's not being addressed as it is to the extent that it is being addressed. It's being addressed in the wrong way and by the wrong people. Like Jews who feel threatened by anti-Semitism may turn to Zionism and think that's the only solution. Just like a lot of Black people who felt threatened by racism may have at one time turned to the Nation of Islam and felt like that was the only solution. And I feel in some ways like the problem is to some extent that, and I guess a better, I know Nation of Islam is one particular strand of black nationalism, just like there's various strands of Zionism, but more or less it's the same thing in that I think that, liberal identity politics is bad. And I think that this kind of particularism for either group is bad, because I think we absolutely do need to come together, and I think there needs to be some recognition among Jews that no, posting articles in the New York Post begging for the cops to come to your defense is ugly and racist, and obviously in the Black community there needs.
What do you mean by that?
I mean that I post in a lot of Jewish groups. Jew book groups, and I have seen. I think that in the same way that you might talk about sort of a misunderstanding of anti-Semitism in the Black community, I have seen some racism in the Jewish community. I've seen some Jews who will post articles from the New York Post, which are always very hyped up about like anti-Jewish hate crimes, but the assailant is always Black, and they'll complain about, oh, why are the cops doing nothing to address this? Which I don't even think that's true. But basically, the problem is that's a misguided response to oppression or to anti-Semitism, because it's a response to anti-Semitism that legitimizes racism, just like responses to racism that legitimize anti-Semitism are also bad. I mean, what we should recognize, I think, is that white supremacy is our common enemy, and we should have each other's backs. Like everyone who is threatened by those groups, by white supremacists, and I think it's possible to recognize that racism, that anti-Black racism, manifests very differently from anti-Semitism, but also to recognize that both are a threat. And the way I would like to see anti-Semitism addressed, it would not be in the way that it has, which, like I said, I think is very misguided and destructive in a lot of ways, but more, I would like to see the left address it. I would like to see the left condemn it as hard as they condemn racism, and just basically for all of us to recognize that we have a common struggle, and we need to fight back against fascism, against white supremacy, and against the system that keeps us divided.
Speaking of which, one thing that I was a little bit disappointed with, I don't know if you only saw the Nick Cannon Professor Griff video, or if you saw the Nick Cannon Rabbi video.
I didn't get a chance to take
I
a look
saw
at
the
that
rabbi
yet.
video.
You saw the rabbi video, okay? And did you see? Did either of you see uh, Stanley Fritz's show with the rabbi on there? The Let's Be
No.
Heard, Let Your Voice Be Heard.
Mm-mm.
Okay. Well, that one you got a chance to talk to the rabbi one-on-one a bit more, like without, Nick Cannon like apologizing and like talking to him one-on-one. And one thing I was disappointed with was when they brought up like privilege. The rabbi was he was many years behind, and he was like bringing up, well, I can't be privileged because, like, to basically summarize what he was saying, and like he wasn't understanding like white privilege and that kind of thing. He was bringing up I worked hard to get where I am. I went through a lot of hardships, as Jewish folks do. And Stanley, I think, attempted to try to delve into it, but it was getting towards the end of the show, so they didn't really go into deep conversation in it. But I found it interesting that he was kind of behind the times on that stuff, and he didn't really understand what the privilege conversation was about.
Well, I often say, in terms of privilege, that and I like the meme that went around on Facebook recently, where being privileged doesn't mean that you don't struggle. It just kind of means that you don't struggle in addition, or excuse me, to being black. You don't have that thrown on top. But I will also want to say, and on another slightly different note, black people also are guilty of marginalizing racist plights, like minimizing it. And they say things like, well, your being Jewish isn't as bad as me being black because you can hide, or you being gay isn't as bad as what I have to go through as a black person because you can hide. Which I think is equally as egregious, is where some people kind of diminish what it means to have privilege. Like, and these are conversations and debates and arguments that I've had with black people who will say things like, well, someone from the LGBT community doesn't suffer the way that I suffered because they can hide. Or someone who's Jewish doesn't deal with, what I have to deal with because they can hide.
Well, here's the thing. I mean, they're correct. They're just saying it in a way that doesn't show empathy, right? Like everyone's different, right? So it's not about everyone's different, and everyone has their own points of privilege, right? So, but first of all, the thing that's
I don't think they're correct. Just to point that out.
Well, it depends on the context of the conversation and who they're talking to. I mean, first of all, they're wrong because they're separating LGBTQ people from black people, as if black people and LGBTQ people are part of the same community. So that's wrong for that reason. But I think what they're trying to say,
there are black Jews also,
and they're also black Jews. And again, Frederick Douglass said it. Like, there's something ridiculous about arguing over who has the better master.
Well, yeah, I mean, Oppression Olympics is always...
What type of oppression, what I mean?
Oppression Olympics is always wrong, right? Oppression Olympics is always wrong. I was a black Jew. I was a part of a Hebrew Israelite, group for a while. But it's always considered like a different thing, which in some ways it is. And that's like, fine. But I think what black folks are trying to say is, if you're being like pulled over by a cop or something, your skin color immediately identifies you as some kind of threat or outsider, or a person that they want to fuck with or something. I think that's what they're trying to say. They may not. They just may be saying it in a way that doesn't show empathy to other groups going through their own shit.
Not only does it not show empathy, it's ignorant to the depth of the other group's plight. And correct me if I'm wrong, correct me if I go out of bounds and I say the wrong thing, but even if you limit your understanding of anti-Semitism to American Jews, Joey said something earlier that speaks to exactly what I'm talking about, right? Just for being Jewish, Jews are targeted in other countries under, anti-Zionism and murdered because they have different identifiers, right? That make them stand out as Jewish people, and they're murdered. So, I mean, like, it also speaks to the ignorance of the depth of other people's plights, of people from other marginalized groups' plights. You're right in the sense that, yes, when a Black person gets pulled over, they have this identifier. But if a person who's a member of the LGBT community chooses to carry themselves a certain way, because if you recall, and all the way up until, near the end of the 21st century, for the most part, they had to hide. Now they don't. And now they may carry themselves a certain way and express themselves a certain way. And just for that, they can be beaten, attacked, battered. You understand what I'm saying? Like, these are different examples of what happens to Black community, but no less egregious. You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, that wasn't my point. And we've argued.
No, you were just saying that, there's Black people come with an identifier pretty much. You didn't say that. I'm kind of saying that. You know what I mean?
To just sort of interject, I basically agree with you both. Like for the rabbi to say those things, to not recognize that white privilege is a real thing, was completely out of touch and completely tone deaf of him. And it's and I think that like Ish said when he introduced this topic, I mean, well, yeah, white privilege obviously doesn't mean your life is easy. It just means nobody has, I guess to say it a different way, nobody has a hard life because they're white, but in other ways they may have horrible struggles. Like yeah, for all we know, that rabbi may have lost relatives in the Holocaust, and that deserves recognition, just like the particular struggles LGBT people go through deserve recognition, just like the struggles that people who are neurodivergent, who are on the autism spectrum go through. I mean, everyone has a struggle that others are unaware of. I mean, as men, we don't have to go through what women go through. So it's like there's all these different ways, and yes, it is ugly when people try to claim their suffering is worse than someone else, because in some instances and in some ways it may be, but really empathy is the way to build solidarity, and the recognition that for very few of us, life isn't easy, and we all have disadvantages, and I think anybody who would minimize that is being unempathetic, and yeah, that includes obviously the rabbi for being clueless about white privilege.
Yeah, I think we have to get to a conversation where everyone recognizes their privilege, because right now the conversation is just white privilege, which is like, it's good that we've gotten to that point, but like, everyone has privilege, right? And it's not to take away from white privilege as like the supreme privilege of the land, but I mean, we definitely need to understand male privilege, cis privilege, hetero privilege, American class privilege, American privilege, which is definitely a thing.
There's levels to it. You're right. This is a good point.
English language privilege. There's like so many privileges, or like citizenship privilege. there's ability privilege. There's so many levels of privilege that people just never think about, and we never think about the people who don't have that privilege, right? We often just like don't. And so, you know, you run into people who, I mean, my God, I mean, one of the worst things is you run into like new citizens who shit on um, uh, undocumented workers. And it's like, it's one of the saddest things to me. And it's like, oh, well, I did it correctly. Why can't you?
Yeah.
And it's
I
like,
mean,
you've got
I've
a
met,
lot of,
I literally
got
have
a lot
met
of nerve.
I literally have met Mexican immigrants who were Trump supporters for that exact reason, and it's just baffling. It's like, I guess, like I just think to myself,
I've met same people, Mexican American citizens who supported Trump
And then,
because
yeah.
of
and then some of
immigration.
them famously got their people deported, like their people got deported anyway,
Yeah.
because the indiscriminate deportation of people who look different, and the assumptions were just like, show us your papers or else, you know.
There's people who came from wealthy families who are just also completely blind to their privilege,
Sure.
like who have no idea what
Sure.
it's like to be down to your last $5 and payday is still 3 days away. I mean, there's a lot of people who are just completely oblivious in that sense, and they'll be judgmental about the decisions poor people make about money, and it's really disgusting.
Yep. Yep. So yeah, I think that's the conversation that like we need to have as a nation, is like everyone needs to like recognize their privilege. It should be called like, someone should like write a book called Check Your Privilege. And that's like literally like,
Hey, that's my phrase. I'm just throwing that out there.
it should be like, you should check mark every point of privilege that you have, and like count it up, and like talk about it and read about it and realize why it's a thing and what it means and what other people are going through who don't have that privilege.
And also to recognize that oftentimes our oppressions are all tied up together. Like, I was watching some Michael Brooks clips, and I saw this one where he really was just making an interesting point. Like, he just said, what is the organization in America that represents the most trans women? It's the AFL-CIO. Like it's not enough just to recognize privilege, because now we have corporations that will cynically exploit gay pride, or will cynically exploit Black Lives Matter. I mean, we also need to have unity, because when corporations start repeating the language of social justice, while just to help them brand things better, while they still have no problem like paying people a sub minimum wage, that just shows the inherent hypocrisy in it. We need to recognize that for everyone to like obviously within the labor movement and within the working class, racism and sexism need to be addressed, but working people and poor people getting screwed is probably the biggest point of unity. And if people could recognize their privileges, but not in like a self-flagellating way, and also recognize that in many ways, even if you are privileged over someone else, what you have in common with them as a poor person, as a working person, is far more than what divides you. And we all and we all like ultimately should come together and fight to ensure that we have a better standard of living, that we can all go to the doctor when we need to, that we all have a livable wage, and a union that's going to look after us and represent us. I think that I do think that a lot of white people who become aware of privilege sort of develop sometimes a misguided white savior mentality. Like, either they themselves come from upper middle class background, or they might just sort of be unwilling to recognize that they too are disadvantaged, and they have this sort of paternalistic attitude, which in and of itself.
Oh my God! Like you're literally hitting a nail on the head. I've said, and I quote myself: if you are white and you find yourself in the position of teaching a minority about racism, it isn't a product of empathy, it is a product of privilege. Like that's just
Definitely.
That's what it is to me. And you're hitting a nail on the head. It's like this paternal, and I get offended by it. Like I get offended by it. It's like, wait a minute, stop teaching me. Let's have a conversation, but don't teach me. You know what I mean? Like I know when to be a student, right? And I'm not going to go, for lack of a better, comparison or scenario, right? I'm not gonna go to you as a Jewish person and begin to explain to you how you've been oppressed as a Jewish person. Like, I'm not going to be the one talking about, do you know what your people went through in World War II? Do you know that you were put in concentration camp? Like you don't know or something. You know what I mean?
Exactly,
because I've got,
absolutely.
You know how many times I've been in situations where people have told me, like I literally had someone go off on a rant on me. Oh, you don't get it. I work in a law firm and, we hate you. And like, you act like you're telling me something that hasn't been echoed by people in my community from as long as I can remember. You understand what I'm saying? Like
exactly. Yeah. You know. Yeah. They and it's like, and it almost in some cases, like when that person says, oh, I work at a law firm and you don't know what we say. In some cases, it just seems like a case of doth lady protest too much. Like, okay, well, well, why are you like saying those things like privately?
Right. Listen, like the guy said in Amistad, when Morgan Freeman said to the abolitionists when they were arguing, because the abolitionists didn't understand why the slaves who were brought over on this boat didn't want to comply. And, Morgan Freeman understood what they went through. And this abolitionist was mad at these slaves. And Morgan Freeman said, some people hate slavery more than anything except the slave. And the abolitionist, like, kind of got like, oh, whoa. You know what I mean? Like, he had to, like, take a step back and really, kind of, like, re-examine himself. Like, wait a minute.
Says it all,
you know
right
what I mean?
there, yeah. That was a great movie.
Yeah. That was a very profound. That's the biggest takeaway I took from that. Like, man, we have to be careful. You know what I mean? We have to be careful. You said it. When when you're talking about, it gets paternal, and sometimes you get. I like to say super liberal. Like you get so liberal that you forget you're actually talking to a victim.
Yeah.
And when you start teaching a victim in any marginalized group about being a victim, it's like, well,
this is getting back to the Biden question and the Southern question about like liberals trying to say, well, why wouldn't you vote for Bernie, or like, why would you vote for Biden? And it's like, I get it.
Or why would you criticize Biden?
Well, that's the new one. Back in 2016, it was, why wouldn't you vote for Bernie, or why would you vote for Clinton? I was actually on the phone today with a black woman who actually did criticize Rashida Tlaib, who I love.
Me too, yeah.
For criticizing Hillary Clinton. And she was like, Hillary Clinton was tutoring like black children like all over, for like a long period of time, and like she's got a lot of like love for that. She like did a lot of work, and like I just say that to tie into the conversation. Like when people are like, don't these people understand why, wouldn't they vote for Bernie? Don't they understand he's going to do the best for them? Or why, why are these people supporting Biden? Don't they understand what he did with the crime bill? It's like, chill out.
Why would they? Why would they criticize Biden? Don't they know the blacks got Biden nominated? Like I've seen that one as well.
Yeah,
The blacks got him nominated.
and that is another form of that is a form of paternalist racism, which I do think that some within my camp, within the Bernie camp and the social democratic
it's
part of this racism.
It's the left. It's the left in general, which is why I've kind of like come up with an easy way for people to digest why people have chosen these certain candidates. I'm like, it's for the work that they put in, and it's for the relationships that these people forged over a long period of time. So it's like, sorry that they don't know, like, your progressive candidate, who's been doing things on the low for a very long time, but these people have relationships. And that's what you learn to trust, is like, you don't learn to trust what someone's platform is or what someone says they're going to do for you. You learn to trust those who have already done for you and who've shown and proven. And until people understand that, it might be difficult for them to break through.
Check the time. I'll be right back. Keep going, but check the time.
Yeah, it might be difficult for these people to break through in communities that they think they'll need in order to win.
Yeah, and I think that I couldn't agree more, and I think that's a really valid point, and I think that goes to the issue, which it goes to a current issue in this country in general, which is that there oftentimes are not very strong working class institutions or institutions that directly help people, that directly provide mutual aid. And I think the left could do a better job of building institutions, unions obviously, but also being around to help people when they're in times of need. That's why mutual aid is important. That's why the old time political machines were so effective at getting people out to the polls, because they would provide you a job. They would provide. They like knew everyone in their neighborhood. They'd be there with
not just around election time. Not just around election time, right?
Exactly. Yeah, and I mean DSA in some instances has tried to branch into that. Like I mentioned this on an earlier episode, or I don't know if it was an episode or just a conversation we had, Flav, where that DSA, I think it was in New Orleans possibly, or the Bay Area, I can't remember where, but was actually fixing people's brake lights. And I think that's that's the kind of work you have to do because that's a way of showing people you mean what you say when you run for office and you say you're going to fight for people's health care. They're not going to take you seriously unless you've shown a willingness to actually be there for them. And I think there's an interesting parallel too, like when you're talking about leftists who said, oh, in really kind of a racist way, oh, why would you vote for Biden? Why would you not vote for Bernie? There's a funny parallel there to liberals who will just say, oh, look at these dumb white racists who vote Republican. Why do they vote against their economic interests? And they completely ignore the fact that the Democratic Party has really not done a whole lot for them. And yes, some genuinely are racist, and that's why they voted for Trump. Actually, a lot of people who voted for Trump, but there's also people who voted for him because he was running against Hillary Clinton, and her husband signed NAFTA, which basically threw unions under the bus, which were the base of the Democratic Party, and destroyed entire communities, and they don't want to recognize that. So yeah, like in different ways, liberals and the left are both very condescending to poor and working people, white and black, and then they wonder why they're not able to get them to support their candidates.
You find exactly what you're talking about. You see it exhibited in the middle class. I mean, the middle class, in many cases, you find, liberals in the middle class that are just out of touch because they can be, right? So you sometimes, and those are usually the ones that I'm referring to, especially, as you get to the upper levels of middle class. I use this term, emoji speak, but action weak, meaning, you're all over social media, speaking very emotional about every issue, but that's your only, many times that's your only window into those issues, because you live in an area, where you don't have to, none of that is in your face.
You got a 2-minute,
right?
You got a 2-minute warning, so we're gonna wind down.
Okay.
Right. I just want to preface, I just want to say, and I don't speak for everyone, but I certainly speak for me. Oftentimes when you view on that issue, you'll find us being, critical of liberals in the left. And that's not because, at least speaking for me, I have anything against, I lean to the left, I support, candidates on that side of the fence. I think that because I do so, it is my responsibility to be critical of the points and the positions that I support, so that we're altruistic and we're right and correct. That's just, I want to say that.
And I
would
co-sign
say
that.
Yeah, I'd say I co-sign that. Farther than leaning, I would say I go, pretty far to the left.
That's what I mean. Yeah.
And so for that reason, I definitely want to be true about that.
Definitely.
So this was an awesome conversation, Joe. Definitely appreciate that, you were willing to contribute as much. Obviously you always contribute to the show, but on this particular topic, I know that it could possibly be sensitive, you know what I mean? And definitely appreciate you for that.
And I appreciate you too. I really enjoyed your pointed questions, and I think we had an incredible discussion. I hope we can have more of these.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, everybody. So, thanks for tuning in.
That's the wrap.
All right. Have a good night.
All right.
Until next time, it's this ish.
Stay on that ish.
Stay on that ish.